You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact. We like to think that we have unified all of Star Trek fandom with our words. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This time we have been watching Unification. It first aired the week of November 4th and November 11th, 1991. It has a teleplay by Jerry Taylor for part 1 and by Michael Piller for part 2, and a story by Rick Berman and Michael Piller. It was directed by Les Landau and Cliff Bowl. James, what's this one all about?
Ambassador Spock is missing, and it seems he's gone to Romulus. Could it be that this living legend has betrayed the Federation? Well, we're going to tease it out for a very long time because Leonard Nimoy doesn't come cheap. But Mark Lenard was also available to play Sarek for a scene to make it feel a bit more like a big crossover event. Data and Picard head to Romulus to investigate, while Riker gets involved in a B-plot involving stolen ships. It seems that Spock has found an underground movement on Romulus who hope to reunify the two peoples and build a shared culture. But it seems there's a dark plan at work, led by Sailor, to try and invade Vulcan, and a plan that doesn't completely make sense. The two generations work together to attempt to save the day and ensure the safe future of the Federation.
Alex, you've never seen this before. It's a momentous moment in Star Trek. Can you have a momentous moment? That doesn't sound right. It's a momentous event in Star Trek history. Spock, arguably the main character of Star Trek, appearing in The Next Generation. What did you think of this one?
How is it that they described the English patient in Father Ted? Father Noel Furlong says, was it very far-fetched and very, very boring? It was my kind of film. I feel like that, but without the latter part. It was just very, very boring. And I'm aware that this is probably a lauded episode, but I've watched it twice now. I watched it last night. I watched it again today because I couldn't remember what happened about halfway through onwards.
Nothing much happens?
Well, that's the thing. I'm not sure that I'm much more up on it now. For what you would expect to be quite a momentous episode. Spock's back. We've got fake Tasha. We've got Law, not that Law. We've got Law with the Romulans and the Vulcans. You'd expect it to be more than it is, but it is just quite a lot of, we're heading to do a thing now. It's like the Fellowship of the Ring without the excitement.
Do you know what? I like this a lot more than you do.
I'm aware that I'm probably in the minority. I'm quite aware
that there's an element of this episode sort of being a promo for Star Trek 6. Which is, Leonard Nimoy, you've just done filming there. Are you maybe up for doing TNG? And there's part of me that does think that this is a massive missed opportunity, because obviously at the time of Star Trek 6 it was like, well, that cast's a bit old, but actually looking at them now, you're like, oh, they're young, they could keep working, they could keep doing Star Trek stuff, and I'm sure if the streaming era had existed then, they all would have been. And you get Leonard Nimoy in this sort of episode, which is a setup, but I'm not sure it's ever really paid off in any meaningful way. And please do not write in and tell me about Unification 3 and Star Trek Discovery, okay? I'm just talking in TNG terms. You could easily have had Spock as a recurring character in TNG by this point. I guess Sarek was in a certain way, and you could have played this as another two-parter. You could have turned up, and again, if you were wanting to do Generations properly, of course Spock should have been in that, and it would have made sense because he was alive during the era, but I'm aware that there was various problems with that, mainly shaped like Rick Berman. But this episode on its own, I think the setup's quite good. Oh, there's a top secret thing happening, and here's a briefing. Oh, look at this photo. Enhance this section. I was like, why did you not bring me the enhanced photo to start with? Ambassador Spock is missing, and look, he's on Romulus. That's a good teaser. That's a good setup, isn't it?
I definitely go with you that it starts more promisingly than it goes. I feel the point where I could feel myself disengaging a bit was the point where... How best to describe it? Well, you've seen the James Bond film You Only Live Twice.
You Only Live... Oh, yeah, I watched You Only Live Twice. That's the racist one, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. So for the uninitiated, there's a part in You Only Live Twice where in Japan, James Bond, played by Sean Connery, has to go undercover, so they Japanese him up.
That makeup does look very Romulan, doesn't it?
Yeah, I watched Picard and Data made into Romulans, and all I could think of is just how racist Sean Connery looked when he was supposed to be made up to look Japanese. Honestly, Google it.
Oh dear.
He kind of also bends over a little bit to seem shorter.
No, if I were Roald Dahl adapting the book into this film, which, bear in mind, he took great liberties with. It doesn't bear... Bits of it bear relation, but huge swathes of it are completely different. I might have removed the bit where James Bond is essentially blacked up. But no, that was a part that Roald chose to keep in. But then he's a deeply questionable man anyway.
He did create the Oompa Loompas.
Yeah, he was also a proud anti-Semite, so you know that puts a bit of a dampener on George's Marvellous Medicine, doesn't it?
James Bond created the Oompa Loompas.
But anyway, from that point onwards, I found myself disengaged. But I'll hold my hands up. It's entirely possible that I was just looking, going, "Christ, it looks like the racist bit in James Bond." And that from that point on, I was entirely distracted by that.
So there's an investigation going on, and that involves going to see Sarek to find out if he knows anything about Spock's disappearance. The best place to go is to speak to someone's estranged father who they've not spoken to in some time, who also has dementia, because there's no one else we know in this era who might know anything about Spock. Not where he was working last or what he was doing, but we'll go to see Sarek. And that's fine. I'm quite happy.
Because he has a very special connection with Sarek, which must really stick in the craw of anyone else that feels that they're meaningful in Picard's life. This man I met once. We had a thing. We touched. I know they meddled it, but...
The thing with Picard is he can't connect with people because his mother hanged herself.
Yeah.
That's what led Sarek to want to die. He'd seen season 2 of Picard.
Mark Leonard, he wasn't very happy that he was invited back for this, and then they killed him off screen. What do you think of that?
I think I'd happily take a day of work where I get to lie on my back. That makes it sound like I want to go into the sex work profession, but I mean, I get it. You feel that you're probably owed a bit more than that.
What did he really expect, considering the nature of the character he was playing in that scene? He didn't have long left anyway. Did he think Sarek was going to make a miraculous recovery?
Maybe just being close to Patrick Stewart will bring anyone out of their old age.
Which it kind of does in that scene. At the convention where Mark Leonard mentioned his disappointment at the death, James Doohan told him that any death occurring off screen is good because there's always a possibility for it to be later reversed. That makes me think James Doohan didn't watch the episode.
I think revisiting the character and I guess doing that story of fathers and sons who can't resolve their differences, do you know what? I think this is a better explanation of parental relationships than Star Trek has perhaps ever done. Of course, Picard here says fathers and sons, and you know that from the look on his face that his father probably locked his mother in a room when Picard was a boy because he feared that she would take her own life.
I would agree with you that it is better done. I find it strange, especially when we've got 2 episodes, that there's not more of it, if you know what I mean. It's there, it's not absent, but it's not really the driving force, especially when episode 1, so much of episode 1 is basically just like kitting up.
The search for Spock.
Yeah.
Were you surprised? Were you maybe not surprised because you're a cynical TV viewer, but were you disappointed that Leonard Nimoy doesn't show up until the very last moment of the first episode?
No, I mean, if you're saying that this is part 1, I assume that your big guest star is turning up at the end of part 1.
Yeah, it has that absolute feel to you. Doesn't? Oh, there's a Spock 2-parter, and it's like, yeah, but realistically, is there?
It's like every single Doctor Who story with Dalek in the title.
I was just thinking that you can guarantee you got a 4-parter Dalek story. You know they're turning up at the end of episode 1, with a crash zoom.
Isn't it interesting? Maybe it's not interesting that they make such a big deal about it being prosthetics that they're fitting to Picard and Data. It's not they're being surgically altered or genetically altered or whatever the hell it was they did in season 1 of Discovery. They are just getting wigs and makeup. Which, I mean, is it offensive to Romulan up in the future?
Well, they literally talk about changing Data's skin colour. I mean,
it's a different time. They've moved beyond racism.
It's not that long ago.
Future.
Oh, you mean in the show?
In the show, yeah, not the 1990s.
Yes, they've evolved past racism, and then in a few years' time they'll get racist again, and then the entirety of racism will be solved before season 2 of Picard. Between season 1 and 2, racism is solved.
Brilliant. Romulus is a bit grimmer than I was expecting it to be.
No, that seems about right to me. You know, this secretive society with a tyrannical government. I always imagined it grey.
Why do these societies always live seemingly underground?
Well, the caves they're just in the caves because they are the underground.
The Romulan Taliban. Is that what? Why would you choose?
Because they're hiding from the government and having secret meetings, and they also had a cave set available.
These groups never have windows, almost because an exterior would be expensive.
You can't go on location. You've already paid for Leonard Nimoy,
and you've paid for that one matte painting, the very, very static matte painting.
That matte painting gets rolled out again in Nemesis, or a version of it, and I've never been more disappointed in a film. Just when you start and you see a very TV TNG matte painting and you go, oh, this is going to be terrible. This is not going to be a good film because it's a cheap looking matte painting.
You've got to pay for Leonard Nimoy and you've got to pay for the Dune buggy. The money has got to come from somewhere.
What do you think of the overall plot? The stakes. It's Spock has gone away, and he very explicitly says, "Oh, I had to do this alone. I didn't want to risk any of my crew." And that actually reminded me very much of the start of Picard, the first season, where Shaban says to him, "Why don't you round up the old gang? Right, get Worf and Riker." And he says, "I wouldn't want to endanger any of them. Let's get another set of pricks to go along with me." But Spock has also got that instinct where he's decided to go it alone because he's lost too many people over the years or something.
I almost feel like that's supposed to be a tease for Star Trek 6. Like you're thinking, oh, and anything could happen in an undiscovered country.
Yeah, I mean, anything could happen in the undiscovered country. It's good.
No, it's a wonderful film. It's my second favourite Star Trek film.
It's certainly more enjoyable than Unification.
Are you invested at all in this idea that the Romulans and Vulcans reuniting as one people, as the Romulans have been, these sort of untrustworthy arch bad guys for all of Star Trek up to now, although they have a shared ancestry? Does this idea appeal to you in any way?
Obviously, this is that is the big overarching plot, but part one is much more sort of, why is Spock up to no good? And then part two is something else again, really. And it feels, especially in part one, that idea of the unification is a backdrop to this other plot. And then it becomes so much more of a focus in episode 2 that by the time we get to episode 2, I don't really care about that, if you know what I mean.
Really, it was all just a ploy to get Spock to Romulus. So it was never actually about reunification, which actually I kind of dislike. That's an element I don't like. The whole Sailor plot just feels kind of bodged on.
I mean, Sailor is a terrible character. It's very much, we've got nothing else. Let's wheel out or rent a baddie kind of thing. There's no reason for that character to exist, but it's sort of, it's a familiar face and they're bad.
I had the same reaction when she arrived as I did watching Rise of Skywalker when it got to that bit with, "You're a Palpatine," and I turned to my wife and went, I had exactly the same reaction when she turned up in this. Oh, right, okay. That for me, the fun was building up to this mission, racism aside, and to be fair, I was saying that I switched off after the "you only live twice" stuff, but actually, no, I would say pretty much up to the end of part one, I'm still invested. It's part two that I really drop off. That whole build up of getting the band together, getting all the stuff ready, going there, the subterfuge, and then I don't know. I feel like it doesn't capitalise once you are there.
I think there's some nice stuff in that build up as well. The stuff going, the Klingons negotiating, them trying to get a ship and being ignored, and Picard getting angry that the politics of the Klingon Empire.
His Passag interaction is one of the highlights in part one.
And then once you're on the Klingon vessel, that scene with Data where Picard's trying to sleep. I mean, they're playing pretty big laughs in that.
Yeah, and the way that Data can't play into the role of the Romulan as he should be, and Picard having to cut him off. All of that works quite well. I don't really have problems with episode 1. If I'm being honest, if you were to separate this out, if we were purely covering episode 1 and not episode 2 with it, I would have a different opinion. It's when we get to part 2 and all of the stuff with the opera singer, it loses me very quickly. What
do you think of the Enterprise plot in part 1, which is going to a shipyard and investigating, playing dead as a junk ship as they see some equipment being beamed onto a smuggler ship and then taken away? I think that's generally all right, that stuff.
Well, it's sort of reminiscent of Best of Both Worlds part 1, isn't it? The Enterprise going out and investigating a mystery. I think that works.
It's fun, but it does feel very much like filler, and we already feel in the main plot that it's got a bit of filler, all just to build up to the cliffhanger.
It's secondary, but even at the end of part 1, I'm still thinking, well, let's see where this plays out to. But I just don't feel it plays out to anything spectacularly great. That's all.
Does it not feel like there's a missing scene? Because at the end of that part, the Enterprise blows up a ship accidentally by firing on it. And then in the next one, it's like, we've come to this bar because this is where our investigation's taking us. And it's like, how? How did it take you there? And it's just like hand-waving in a log. And then it feels like a very, I guess it's written by two different people. It feels like a very different script at this point because the investigation is just basically beating someone up for information. And it just feels a little bit less. It's not going through logs and engaging with an interesting comedy alien or anything like that. It just feels a bit less Star Trek, a bit more Star Wars, I guess.
It feels like a budget DVD line take on trying to do the cantina scene in A New Hope, where they haven't really understood what makes it work. And they've put it into some sort of crappy bargain bin Bruce Willis film or something like that. Every second that we spend in that bar is a second that I'm desperate to get away from that plot.
Didn't you like it when Worf was incandescent that she didn't know any Klingon opera?
No. I genuinely, the thing, if you want me to identify the thing that I hated more than anything else, it is that opera singer.
It does feel like filler, and I don't like to say that, but the fact that they go, oh, can you wait around here for a couple of days, then this guy might turn up, and that's exactly the feeling you get from the episode. It is the most B plot of B plots, and so they were stealing bits so the Romulans could have Vulcan ships to pretend that the Vulcans were escorting the Romulans from Romulus as a peace treaty, and then they were going to just invade Vulcan. And it feels like a very poor plan to me. It doesn't really make any sense. It's like, you could probably, if you wanted to do that slow invasion of Vulcan, it's just like, go claim asylum. Just keep doing that. Keep on filling up the planet, or just secretly infiltrate it and then go after many years. Ha! We were Romulans and we've been influencing your society. But it's just like, now we're going to fly there in a big ship. And then it's too late. I was like, is it?
Isn't the plan you're describing kind of what the Romulans did in Star Trek Picard Season 1?
Maybe. Except that makes no sense. They led to their own destruction. What were they thinking of?
The stakes of, was it 3 Romulan ships heading for Vulcan? It feels much lower than the previous two-parter, Redemption.
I think everything feels kind of low stakes because even like Spock, who is, I mean, I feel kind of galactically famous, just wandering around Romulus seems a bit odd to me. But maybe that's okay. Fine, we'll accept that. But the underground movement, him just hanging around with a bunch of kids who are going, we've read the Bible every day and we like it very much, and him going, yes, there are many good words in it, and then him just going to a meeting with a low-level MP and saying, oh, I'm lobbying for more religion in schools, and him going, that's very good, I really like that. It doesn't feel like there's really actually any planetary implications. It feels very sort of like they're joining a church committee or something like that.
I'm lobbying the Green Party.
I'm really glad you said that, because when I was watching it, and I made a note to come back to it, I'd completely forgotten. I had thought when I was watching it, I get that he's sort of in an ambassador role, but it doesn't really feel like that. He feels like a Christian missionary. Yeah. So thank God it wasn't just me. I thought that as well. Yeah.
So I guess that is kind of the problem. It is the plot of the episode and
everything with it. That's the problem.
I think the stuff with Picard and Spock, where Spock is the son and Picard is the father, and that's quite an interesting dynamic because you have obviously the actor and the character from the 1960s Star Trek, and they're looking to, I guess, the next generation as a father figure, and that's kind of an interesting dynamic. I like the stuff with Data and Spock, where they solve the problem with the computers, and then that's paid off with Data doing the nerve pinch, and a nice conversation about what it means to be human between Spock and Data. I think all that stuff is really good, but I guess it's just everything around the character moments is maybe less satisfactory.
Yeah, I would agree. Star Trek Next Generation is often at its best when it is talky. You know, take an episode like Measure of Man. It's not a lot of action going on there, but that's a great episode. But it's getting deep into the characters and what makes them tick. And that's the part of this episode that works. When we're talking about the politics of the two civilizations and how they can come together, you're just inherently going to be less invested in that, I think. Because what are your personal stakes in it? The way that the story is setting up, your personal stakes are in Spock and Picard, and although that comes into that story is something else. That is about the father relationship, and it's almost like a weird spin on a stepdad story.
Do you think it has that problem? I think I've probably complained about it in New Star Trek, especially the movies, especially the sort of the moment where they go, "I am Khan," and it's like that means nothing to the characters. Or maybe in a Marvel film where you've just got a cameo from someone else, and you're just like, well, I don't know who this is. This doesn't matter without the context of having already read a comic book. Do you think Spock is like that in this? Do you think, like, as a standalone character in an episode, he works? Or do you think it doesn't matter because Spock is so much bigger than the universe?
I don't think... If you were coming into the Next Generation entirely cold, completely devoid of any knowledge of Star Trek prior, I don't think it would have any impact because they don't do enough of a job to set up why Spock would be important enough outside of being Sarek's son. But let's be perfectly honest, no one's coming to this without at least a vague cultural knowledge of who Spock is, so it kind of doesn't matter.
They do describe him as the legendary ambassador.
I know, but then they never really explain why. It's just like any decorated admiral that comes into an episode and disappears out again in the show.
I think it would still kind of work in that way. We're talking about, as you say, it's a very small audience who might not know who Spock is.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a section of the audience that you should give any heed to be honest, because you'd really have to be going to have been watching 5 seasons of this and have zero cultural context of anything else around it.
Yeah, I think if anything, you got to keep in mind that this is the best rated episode of Star Trek The Next Generation since its pilot.
Good Lord.
People watched because of Spock.
Well, okay, yeah, that would make sense.
Do you think maybe that this episode might have actually been better without any of the Romulan plotline?
Yes.
If it was about Sarek dying and then them having to find Spock and give him the news.
Yeah, I feel like there's a tighter single episode in there somewhere.
But I guess they are trying to make it a movie-level plot. They are trying to, you know, you've got the Klingon politics, albeit in a kind of sideways way, but you go to Klingon, you get the ship, then you're going across all of space. They are trying to make it really big, and I feel it kind of just, it falls away through budget, and you know, you don't really have many extras. You've got a few of Spock's disciples, but then it falls into the worst cliches, which is just, oh, we've left Data, Picard and Spock alone in a room with the resources to free themselves. It just it's a slightly ridiculous kind of escape in the end.
It's a fun deception.
It's a fun deception, don't get me wrong. I quite like it. And it works, but like if you're analysing it, and if you've watched it many times, which you know I have, then it does feel like it's maybe they could have done something a little bit different there, because it is sort of screenwriting 101. Oh, okay, just bad guys are going to leave these very resourceful and intelligent, legendarily so people in a room, and they're just going to go having told you all of their plan. I feel holograms probably devalue any message in this century. If you can make anybody say anything, then how do you know what to trust? The resolution, it all just feels a little bit unsatisfying, I suppose. It's all build up and nothing actually happening, although Spock does warn everyone that something bad's going to go down, and then a Romulan warbird kills all its troops on board the Vulcan ships. And you just think, okay, you're in a cloaked ship that no one's detected. Again, why not just go there? Go on down to... But I guess there's some kind of security net you have to get through or something. But yeah, and then Spock decides to stay on Romulus to work with the children, even though they know he's there and don't like him. Like, I don't really get why, like, they're not all arrested and shot.
Do you think that maybe Spock just isn't that well known on Romulus? I assume they don't get Federation TV channels.
It's like when Robbie Williams goes to America.
Yeah, pretty much.
I feel there's a better science fiction one I could have done there.
Spock is the Robbie Williams of Star Trek.
So yeah, they're fine with just this weird guy hanging out in caves. The Osama bin Laden of Star Trek. He's making videos, he's teaching people about his religion.
I mean, you can see why that guy from the reboot was so angry at him.
Do you want to see Sela again?
No.
Good. Because you're not going to. That's her last ever appearance.
Oh, good.
Do you want to see Spock again in Star Trek Next Generation? Do you think that Sarek, because he died off screen, will come back in another episode as an action hero?
Yeah. Haunting Picard's dreams or some such crap, yeah. It's remarkable, isn't it? It's 2 episodes. There should be loads to talk about. And for something that's plot dense, it just happened. I genuinely enjoyed the sex game episode last time more. Who would have thought?
I would agree. I think that the episodes either side of Unification are better.
I feel that the game kind of shows up Unification a bit in its placement, because it's sort of showing, oh, this is what a fun romp, good time could be, and then we're going to have 2 very dull weeks of ambassadorial proceedings.
What about cowboy diplomacy? That's fun, isn't it?
Oh, God.
But the thing is, it wasn't the ambassadorial stuff that kind of takes away from it. It's when the deception starts to play into it. That's what, I hasten to say, ruins it, because it's still a good 2-parter. I still really enjoy it.
They don't know how to resolve it. And I think whenever Sela walks in, it's just like, oh, this is just like, oh, I'm going to be a bad guy and the plan is to kill everyone. And you're just like, oh, okay, fine. Yeah, it's an episode sort of that's got a beginning but doesn't have a resolution. And I know they do that a lot in TNG, and sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. Here I would say it's okay. If you're bringing back a legendary character, there possibly would have been a better way to do it than this. I would say when they bring back another original series regular, they do a far better job of it next time. Anyway, let's go and see if there's any trivia we want to highlight in Quickfire.
Quickfire.
They actually tried to get Spock on season 2 of Next Generation before the writers' strike scuppered those attempts. Good thing that didn't happen.
You're not wrong.
Maurice Haley doing a Spock episode.
So, Unification originated with a suggestion by Frank Mancuso Sr., the chairman of Paramount Pictures, during the planning of Star Trek VI. He proposed Leonard Nimoy could film an episode of Next Generation, and because it was 25 years of Star Trek, they should find some way to mark that occasion. And so Rick Berman met with Nimoy and Nicholas Meyer, and that's why you've got the references to Kittimer in this episode, because they're basically trying to make it feel of a piece with Star Trek 6. But Berman recalled, we structured a deal with him. He got very little, a little more than scale, union salary minimum. But with Leonard as the executive producer of Star Trek 6, what you had in essence was a cross-promotion. It made everybody happy. Spoken like a true company man.
I'm going against my better judgment. I am going to include something from the Nitpicker's Guide, despite the fact that it's 2 episodes of very boring stuff, just purely for the fact that I suspect Phil Farrand had a word count to hit. Because we have, as Spock, Picard and Data escape from Sella's office, the camera pans over her desk. The desk contains a reflective crystal pyramid. So far so good. When the camera sweeps past it, the face of a 20th century man, complete with glasses and chewing gum, shows up clearly in its mirror-like finish. Okay. Open brackets. I must confess that I did not find this jewel. In one of her editorial memos to me, my editor added this postscript. A friend of mine, Laurie Shanahan, asked that you make sure to include the reflection in the pedestal from Unification. Of course, that sent me scrabbling for my tapes. Close brackets. I mean, what was the point of that paragraph? But... Great!
Did you think it was weird that, like, the episode was called Unification 1? Like, the first part had the number in it. I guess it was to hint that there was more coming, and it didn't just weirdly end with Spock, and then next week they would just be off on another mission.
It's... Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. Surely you would have part 1. But I feel if I get too far into complaining about that, I'm into the Phil Farrand territory.
The metaphor for this here, which, I didn't even get, was the reunification of East and West Germany, which was happening at the time. But I just don't feel they get into it enough for that to actually be meaningful, because it's kind of more of a character piece, maybe, but with lots of plotty bits all over the place.
And did one side try to send spaceships to destroy the other?
That is what happened. And then David Hasselhoff sang a song and the wall came down.
Imagine if this episode ended with David Hasselhoff singing.
So director Cliff Ball, director of part 2, he said, we should have gone out. We should have put some air in that show. We shouldn't have been in a cave so long. We should have gone out and had a little more action. Yep.
Easy to say with hindsight.
Yes. I mean, Michael Piller, he the writer of part 2, he was quite critical of it. And when I looked at the second hour of Unification, I'll always consider a character study of Spock, and I realised it was talky and nothing goes on. I was very unhappy with that. It's no secret I was disappointed, more by my own work on it than anything else. I remember watching it for the first time to cut together and saying, this is dark, it's flat, who cares, it's talky. I'm a writer who depends a great deal on his instinct, and they almost always lead me in a good direction. This time, I don't think they did. If I had to do it over, I would do a science fiction mystery with weird stuff and get Spock involved in some form or fashion. It was unfortunate that we chose to do another political story so close to the stuff we'd just done with the Klingon Empire. It was a very politically heavy opening of the season. I mean, I think that's fair, but I also do think he's been quite harsh on himself. Obviously, in the run of a TV production, and TNG was an intense period, you kind of just got to get through those episodes, and you almost want to wait for a good idea until you do the Spock episode. But if you're just like, we need to do the Spock episode, then I guess you need to do it. And I'm sure there's a worse version of this. This is not bad. It's just sort of a bit middling, I would say.
Yeah, their hands was forced. They had a short amount of time to get a 2-parter out before Undiscovered Country hit cinemas. I'm sure you're all wondering what happened to Pardek.
Oh, it keeps me up at night.
So, according to Memory Beta, he continued to serve in the Romulan government, and you'll be happy to hear he even survived Shinzon's assassination of the Romulan Senate.
Oh, good.
And then he was killed by a member of the Tal Shiar.
Ah, that's a shame. I mean, we'll get to that when we cover all of the books and comics, as we're going to do once we finish all these episodes. Leonard Nimoy initially expected there might be a sequel to this episode's 2-parter. I mean, you would, wouldn't you? For a while, for a moment in time, he recalled, I thought maybe I would get a phone call saying, we want to pick up the thread of the story. I never heard anything about it, and I didn't pursue it. I do find it surprising that they did not go there again. I mean, there's still another 2.5 years left of this show. You would think that might be something you might want for a season finale, is maybe Spock in an episode rather than, say, Descent.
I am surprised that they never... I know they tried to bring him back in Generations, but when they were coming up with 9 and 10, they never thought, let's bring back Spock.
I understand that you'd kind of want to not go there, but yeah, I would have thought, by the time you get to Nemesis, you might need a bit of a kick. But anyway.
Particularly as that was a Romulan story.
Many missed opportunities throughout the years. Thank you for listening once again. We will be back fairly soon, and we will be talking about A Matter of Time, so we hope you'll join us for that one. But for now, goodbye.
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 Despite the racism, it's a good film. I only like the racist James Bond films.